Bro, what if the reason you keep struggling with lust is because your wife just isn't attractive enough? Maybe that's an uncomfortable thought. But if we're being honest, some men have thought it. Maybe you've never said it out loud. Maybe you've never even fully admitted it to yourself. But somewhere in the back of your mind, there's been a thought like, if my wife looked different, if she looked more like the women I see online, if she took better care of herself, maybe I wouldn't be struggling with lust anymore. And when you think about it that way, it can almost feel logical. After all, you're attracted to your wife, but then you see someone else, someone who looks different, someone who seems more attractive. And suddenly, the thought comes, maybe that's my problem. Maybe my wife isn't enough. Maybe if she were prettier, I wouldn't be looking at other women. And if that's where your mind goes, I want you to stop for a moment, because there's something we need to understand. Your wife was never supposed to compete with every woman you've trained your eyes to desire. Think about what pornography and fantasy can do over time. They can teach you to constantly look for something new, a different body, a different face, a different fantasy, a different woman. And eventually, the problem isn't that your wife became less attractive. The problem is that your mind became trained to constantly search for something else. And that's a very different problem. Because if you believe your wife's appearance is the solution, then you're putting an impossible responsibility on her. She has to stay attractive enough. She has to look a certain way. She has to keep changing. And every time you see someone who looks different, you'll find another reason to believe she isn't enough. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Even if your wife became exactly the kind of woman you thought would finally satisfy you, your eyes could still learn to want something else. Because lust doesn't simply say, find the most beautiful woman. It says, what's next? That's why a man can look at his own wife and still look at another woman. It's not necessarily because his wife suddenly became unattractive. It's because he has learned to feed a desire for novelty. And novelty has no finish line. There's always someone else, someone younger, someone different, someone you haven't seen before, someone your imagination can make perfect, because you don't have to live with her. You don't have to see her bad days. You don't have to experience ordinary life with her. You don't have to deal with disagreements. You don't have to see her tired. You don't have to watch her grow older. Fantasy gets to stay perfect. Real people don't. And that's one of the reasons pornography and fantasy can distort the way a man sees his own marriage. Real love lives in reality. Lust lives in imagination. And if you constantly feed the second, you can slowly become dissatisfied with the first. So no, your wife doesn't need to become more beautiful for you to become free from lust. And this isn't me saying physical attraction doesn't matter in marriage. Of course it matters. Your wife isn't a robot. She isn't an obligation. She's a person you're supposed to love, desire, honor, and cherish. But her appearance cannot be responsible for the condition of your eyes. That's your responsibility. And I think there's another side to this that we don't talk about enough. Maybe you're not struggling because your wife isn't enough. Maybe you're struggling because you've been asking something from your wife that no human being can provide. Constant novelty, constant excitement, constant sexual stimulation, constant validation. No person can compete with an unlimited stream of fantasy. And your wife shouldn't have to. Because marriage was never designed to give you an endless supply of new bodies. It was designed for something far deeper. To know and be known. To love someone through ordinary days. To choose them when the excitement isn't overwhelming. To build intimacy that goes far beyond appearance. So if you're a married man struggling with lust, please don't turn your wife into the explanation for your struggle. And don't turn yourself into a hopeless case either. You don't need a prettier wife. You need to understand what you've been training your heart and your eyes to seek. Because maybe the problem was never that she wasn't enough. Maybe you've simply forgotten how to be satisfied with what is real. And that's something that can change. Not overnight, not because your wife suddenly looks different, but through thousands of small decisions. To stop feeding the fantasy, to stop comparing, to stop looking for the next thing, and to start learning how to see the woman beside you, not as someone who has to compete, but as someone you have been entrusted to love. Bro, if you've ever thought, if my wife was prettier, I wouldn't struggle with lust, maybe it's time to ask a different question. Not, what's wrong with her? But, what have I been training my heart to want? Because the answer to that question might change the way you see your entire marriage.